Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Juvenile Justice Town Hall. For those of you who've participated in previous years or in our town halls earlier in the last week or two, you know that these are an opportunity for the commissioners of different state agencies and the chairs of those committees in the Senate and the Assembly to address directly families and young people with lived experience in this particular area. In this issue, or in this town hall, it's going to be about juvenile justice. I'm Paige Pierce. I'm the CEO at Families Together in New York State. And we are thrilled to have with us today Commissioner Rosado, who is the commissioner for DCJS. So Commissioner, I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about what's going on over there at DCJS.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I've been here, I'm going on 4 years, and at DCJS, we describe ourselves as a multi-level resource for all the folks doing the work, in the field. And so we cover all the law enforcement, right? The PDs, police departments and marshals and DAs. Just met with one of the DAs this morning. And in addition, we have an Office of Public Safety, which is basically, we provide training for uniformed officers all over the state. And in our Office of Youth Justice, we have programs that are targeted to youth. Unfortunately, by the time, we get to spend time with youth, they've already had their first encounter with law enforcement. And so we have partnerships with the YJI, which is the Youth Justice Institute, based out of Albany, SUNY Albany, to deal with kind of more proactive work. We also work closely. So we have another division that oversees all of probation, which is where a lot of our youth are in. And then we work in partnership with OCFS. But again, once the youth come in contact with OCFS and DCJS, they've already had some encounter, with law enforcement or with, I want to say, some hardship. Our goal at DCJS, now that we have achieved kind of these historic lows in the crime rates and we've had some money, the governor has funded our ability to do that, we like to spend more time on the preventive, on getting to kids before they have an encounter with a state agency. And that's kind of our goal. We like to focus a little more in the coming year and years on just a broader sense of youth well-being. So thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions. My agency is, we have so many divisions that I could go on and on, but I'm glad to answer more specific questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's wonderful that we have such a diverse group of ambassadors who are on this panel that are going to be asking questions, because you'll get to see, while DCJS is has some diversity in terms of the different divisions, so too are the people that you serve. Very different lived experiences and different ages, different demographics. And so we're pleased to be able to bring a handful of people together today to ask you some pointed questions that will help our larger population of families and young people that are watching today, or that will be watching on the recording, so that they can understand better what does DCJS do, how are their lived experiences being addressed or paid attention to across the state. So I'd like to introduce Brad Hansen. He's our Director of Public Policy, and Brad's going to introduce the speaker or the questionnaires and moderate today's town hall. So Brad.
Yes, thank you so much, Paige. Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you to all the incredible youth and parent ambassadors that are here today. We greatly appreciate your participation in this, your lived expertise that you're bringing to this room, and the conversation that we're about to have. I want to first queue up Carlos, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Um, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carlos. I'm a 17-year-old who recently just graduated high school. Uh, I was impacted by the justice system at the age of 16, and I was put into an ATI, which is an alternative to incarceration program, which has helped me during my last year of high school, and now I'm on the path to going to college to get my social work degree. The question I had for you was, I'm sorry, as I'm a little,
You're doing great.
nervous.
You're doing
Okay.
fantastic,
Currently
Carlos.
in New
We're
York
thrilled to
City,
have you.
okay. So currently in New York, it costs $900,000 a year to incarcerate young adults, and it takes $10,000 to create an after-school program. What are some concrete things that these DCJS can do to reallocate this funding to ATI programs?
You're on mute, Commissioner.
That's why I need IT here. First of all, Carlos, congratulations on your college journey, because I think that, that is important. And where are you seeking your social work degree?
So I'm currently in BMTC, and I'm gonna do my 2 years, and then I'm gonna start as an internship somewhere, and then I'm gonna go to 4-year college since BMTC has a pipeline to transfer those credits. So I'm gonna get
Yes.
my 4 years regardless. So yeah.
Good, wonderful. I just want you to know that I'm on the board of trustees of CUNY, so if you need help, you can everybody here has my number. So just to answer your question as directly as possible, DCJS funds the people who are helping, working in the ATI community. But it's not directly connected to kind of after school programs. I'll say this, pulling the lens back a little bit. There's the Raise the Age funding from both OCFS and DCJS that makes more money available to communities to bring in programs like these. And we're, dedicated to getting that money out into the community. Many of the programs operate across the state in community centers or other local organizations. Unfortunately, depending on where you are in the state, you have more access, or less access. DCJS continues to evaluate how to make those funds more flexible and accessible. But when you say it takes this much money to take care of a young person, and then it takes this much, often we use those comparisons, in pitching, but the reality is that those things are completely disconnected. This year in August, on my birthday, which was August 20th, the DCJS released an RFA, a request for applications, that includes individuals in youth part as an eligible target population. And the total amount for that RFA is $15.5 million. So we hope, we get a good response. I know there's going to be a good response because a bunch of people called me the next day to say they had missed the deadline and could I do anything? And I can't do anything because this is a procurement process that is sacred. And I think that if there's $15 million on the board, you should make the deadline. But we're looking forward to hearing everybody's great ideas for that. So to the extent that we can get money out in the communities to fund these programs that are alternatives to incarceration, we're 100% supportive of alternatives to incarceration, because it's been our experience that incarceration doesn't solve a lot of the issues that youth are dealing with, especially, again, as I said earlier, they're already in the system. So I hope that answered your question, and I'm happy to take more.
Yeah, it did. I also have another question. So, Jamal Bailey, co-sponsors our bill, YJNO, that adds protections for young adults in the legal system. What other investments have you both put in place to support all the youth, which is the ages from 18 to 25 in the legal system? Given that emerging adults have unique needs and opportunities for support and are still young and should receive youth-based protections.
Again, that's more directly related to the courts, and we're kind of outside of that. I mean, we're supportive of everything that allows people of the age between 15 and 18 as much agency as possible. As we know, from the stories, there are youth who, are in households where they have circumstances that they don't have necessarily agency to solve, but we want to make the people who we fund, we want to make our folks available so that youth can have a path to, kind of get out of a bad situation, but also have everything cannot be answered, in my view, everything cannot be answered by schools and families. There should be an ability to find a path, regardless of what's happening in those two realms, for all youth of all ages. We don't stop serving youth because, they turn 21, right? I mean, we see the spectrum going all the way to 24 lately. So my goal is that we provide in government, not just DCJS, because everything is a partnership with the courts, OCFS, and other agencies like Department of Labor, that we are all equally invested in the success of all youth. That's what I believe to my core.
Okay, thank you. That'll be all.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Commissioner, for your responses. I want to now queue up April. April, go ahead and introduce yourself and ask a question. April, you're on mute.
April, you turned off your microphone instead of your camera instead of your microphone. Oh, there you go. Now you can turn your camera back. There you go.
Okay. Hold on, I gotta get. Hi, my name is April Odom, and I am a grandparent from Syracuse. I have been caring for my grandchildren for several years, including my granddaughter, who is currently court involved on probation and has spent time in detention too often. Families who reach out for help with a child in crisis, especially when violent or destructive behaviors put siblings and relatives at risk, are treated as if they are part of the problem rather than being supported. As a caregiver, how can I ensure my granddaughter receives the urgent medical health assessment and treatment she needs without my family being criminalized in the process? And what options are available to protect the safety of other family members, particularly when grandparents or relatives can no longer safely care for the child while navigating the legal system?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for all that you do. I know it's difficult to juggle kind of these competing priorities. But not only supporting a household and all its members, but to address very complex and challenging needs of family members across the multiple systems, especially the mental health system, which I have to say, in the last 2 years, the governor has invested a lot of resources, money targeted to kind of resolving these issues, not just the specific mental health issues, but also kind of that interaction when those mental health needs come into contact or conflict with the law enforcement. So we ask for help of each system to participate. It still boggles my mind that you have to go to each system as a caregiver and require each system, to speak on. And so I can tell you what we've done. Probation officers can and do conduct mental health screenings that can help to identify some of those early issues, or make a referral to a mental health professional. But you also see here the interaction of all these, and we don't really have a role there, but it's OMH, Office of Mental Health, the local, police department, the local kind of social workers also. And there's so many things going on at the same time that it's hard. When we go out into the community and we talk to the practitioners, even the people who have been doing probation for a long time, they're overwhelmed, with trying to draw down on all these services on behalf of their clients. They also seek trauma-informed services, trying to identify the providers who will work with the families. I hear you when you say that sometimes the families are treated as if, they're either part of the crime or part of the problem. I can tell you that DCJS does an amazing amount of training each year of law enforcement. And you know, we've been successful in that training so that they can understand kind of, you know, the broader picture. But sometimes, you know, these interventions and services can come to your home. There are respite opportunities also for probation involved children and the siblings. We try to fund case management in all of these cases. And I would, you know, I don't have all the answers, April, but I would say that you also have to take care of yourself in there too. Aside from us, the Office of Children Family Services, OCFS, provides funding to most services for youth 17 years and younger, most services that also involve mental health. These are called supervision and treatment services for juveniles programs. And there's a, you know, I can put a web connection, a website in the chat for you. I can do it while I talk, but I'll put that in there. And those are, you know, that's an area where you can find some answers. We believe that local systems of care should address the whole family. And, you know, we fund that. But, and I know the folks who are delivering services of Syracuse pretty well, and Syracuse is one of the best, you know, systems we have. But not every place in the state is equally staffed or expert at dealing with those issues. So I'll stop there, and I'll send you a link on the site. But you know, if you need to follow up with someone, I'd love to provide someone who can answer more directly what is going on in Syracuse for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you both. Thank you so much, April, especially for asking your question. I'm going to queue up now Sebastian. Feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me? Is it working? So my name is Sebastian Simanate. I'm a high schooler from a small town around South Glens Falls. It's called, well, around Saratoga Springs, it's called South Glens Falls. And recently I've been working with an immigration lawyer to defend the rights of many adults and minors whose status in the US has been challenged. And I've seen firsthand the tough effects young people face when placed in criminal hearings. Being a Latino, I can speak to how we've been historically marginalized in the United States and in the justice systems throughout the country. We usually find ourselves disenfranchised because of our first language, color of our skin, our work, or our legal statuses. This, combined with the fact that most of the marginalized groups in this country lack adequate legal resources, makes our fight for equal opportunity even harder. When teens were treated as adults in criminal hearings, the fight to give them good resources was harder, and considerably harder for those that did not have the financial resources already in place to support them. So my question is that what resources are in place, if any, to help the marginalized and destitute youth in justice systems?
I mean, that's a whole workshop, Sebastian. You know, that's a big question. I will take it in pieces. It's a very broad question with many possible answers. I'm going to put aside the marginalized and destitute for a minute and talk about the youth who are in these sometimes impossible, you know, immigration situations. I can tell you that the governor has funded our ability to help families in immigration crisis. Before I was at DCJS, I spent 6 years as Secretary of State. I ran the Department of State, and there we have a unit called ONA, the Office of New Immigrants. It's the Office of New Americans. And we dedicated a lot of resources to helping, again, immigrants in crisis based on all the stuff that was happening. Back then, it was the first presidency. And so I also taught at John Jay, and we funded the same kind of legal services for young people who are being separated from their families, and especially what we came to call the dreamers. I'm sorry, as you can see, it's a very emotional issue for me because there's the prosecution of children and young people who had nothing to do with how they got here. And that doesn't mean, you know, that their families or their parents are criminals either. So we do have resources in the state for to help people in the legal process and to help young people still pursue, you know, college. especially in the public systems, with an eye toward having a path eventually that will lead to legalization and to them staying in this country. But truly, we are living difficult times. And so, I'll stop there. In terms of the broader group of young people struggling with situations beyond their control, the funding and resources vary by jurisdiction. It seems like the background has been directed to legal support and resources. We do have an Office of Indigent Legal Services in addition to ONA that provides public defense. I'll put that in the chat too. I'll put that link in the chat. We also have community dispute resolution centers, which can provide both court and involved in pre-involvement and mediation services. But these are tough things for youth to undertake on their own. So I mean, the resources are there, but we need to direct young people who are in this kind of crisis to adults who can help them, to experts who can help them. Even though they say you don't need a lawyer for these immigration proceedings, it's a mistake not to show up with a lawyer because the rules change daily. If you're keeping track, the rules do change daily. So I want to say that we have state resources that are in place to help all the youth you mentioned, whether they're marginalized or they're in institutions or they're poor and they're seeking independence from their families. We do have a lot of legal help for that. But the best way to draw down on them is to go through the community organizations that are doing this work and to make sure that they're trustworthy and to make sure that you're not giving all your information to someone who doesn't have your best interest at heart. Thank you. I need to grab a tissue.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Sebastian, I saw you had raised your hand earlier. I didn't know if there was a follow-up.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up like a specific example. Like the other day, we were working on a case. I don't know how much you can speak to immigration courts, being that you're in criminal circuit in different circuits, but there was a kid who was taken off the streets because of the way he looked and where he was walking, as a certain like van passed by, and the person is denied lawyers and stuff like that, since the immigration system is changing like on the daily. It's those people that I'm curious about what the state is doing to defend these people that are unlawfully taken or are placed in the prison system, where services like the PLS are unable to really offer adequate help to the volume that's arriving.
I mean, they're not placed in our prison system. They're either, they're turned over to INS. That's a different system, or whatever. INS is not ICE. As I said earlier, the governor has dedicated resources to making sure that people who are here doing the right thing, can stay and have some defense, especially young people. But the country's in a tizzy when it comes to immigration, and the rules change every day. And so we do our best to empower people to be able to defend themselves, and to call. We have hotlines, again, through ONA, we have hotlines where we can provide legal representation. It is a tough time.
I mean, there's so much truth to those words and things that you said. It could be a workshop, and Sebastian, let's connect after, because I do think that's something that would be appropriate for our network to benefit from, because so many of our family and youth's lived experience include ones in which they're interacting with an increasingly aggressive immigration system that is punishing people who are New Yorkers. So I want to thank you for sharing a little bit about your practice and your experience, and for standing up for other families and youth who are going through those circumstances. Really appreciate this question. And Commissioner Rosado, I know this is deeply personal for you. I really appreciate you trying your best to keep a straight face and navigate your position as you answer that question. I'm going to switch things up. We'll go to Khadijah, who's actually asking a question on behalf of an ambassador who couldn't make it on, Priscilla Romero. So Khadijah, thank you for being willing to do this. Please ask Priscilla's question.
Hi, everyone. Like Brad said, I'll be asking this question on behalf of Priscilla Romero from New York City. She is someone who went through the juvenile justice system as a child, and she saw firsthand how hard it was for her family. They didn't receive much guidance, support, or resources at the time, and her mother, who only spoke Spanish, often felt left out of decisions that shaped her future. Now that she's a parent herself, she can see even more clearly how critical it is for families to be included and supported when their child is involved with the system. So her question was, what strategies are in place to improve family involvement in the juvenile justice process, and how can we enhance access to essential services such as mental health support, educational resources, and vocational training for both youth and their families?
Thank you. I mean, so, family involvement is essential. And as these systems I believe are changing. Under this governor, we've invested a lot of time in refreshing, renewing, retraining. But the fact is that the systems don't make it easy for families to be involved. It's scary, It's a scary, it's a scary system. You don't know who you're talking to. And so while family involvement is critical to one's success in probation, we still have a lot of work to do so that people can trust that, right? Youth benefit from consistent messages and support at home and in the community. And sometimes, sometimes there's a conflict of old world and new world. Parents are they're a required component of every youth probation case. Probation officers try to build a relationship, both with, the client and the parents or the family, and they try to stay in contact. Sometimes families reach out, because if there are mental health issues and others, they do need, support. But the way, the government works, this has always been, kind of one of my peeves since I've been in government, which is almost going to be 10 years, is that, the government funds your ability to do case management, your relationship with the person who's on probation is solid and is funded, but your relationship with the family, with the community is not funded, right? It's not, I used to work in do volunteer work in reentry. And so we have a guy come home from prison and we had total funding for his education, but we didn't have any money to fund his wife's education, who had been home, with the kids for, 8 years. And so, government is funny that way. And we have to find ways around that to understand that you can't have the case management is not just about the person whose name is on the folder, that you need, to provide resources and answers for the family. So, we work with the probation officers to schedule visits in the home. But sometimes people in the home think that they're under, investigation if a probation person shows up. So you try to, have those meetings in the office, and try to stay in touch using, email and text and video chat. So parental involvement is critical, but it cannot be the responsibility of the probation officer or parole officer or another adult to determine if that family relationship is solid, right? So I just, put that out there, that we also have to make sure that we have a realistic view of what those relationships are, as opposed to sometimes we have a brain that says this is what it should be. And if it's not, then it's not valid. I hope that makes sense. DCJS has also previously partnered with Department of Labor to provide information to probation departments and DCJS funded programs on apprenticeship opportunities and other, because one of the most difficult things that we experience with youth is, is that they have no agency, right? You can't even get a job without your working papers. I would like to do away with working papers, because they were supposed to protect kids, but they really don't. And if you don't have the ability to generate some income and you're in a household where there is poverty, it's very difficult to say, well, wait till you're 18, right? That seems like a long sentence. So anyway, that's a long answer for Priscilla. But I'll stop there so we can have more questions. And Paige, do you have your hand up?
I do. Thanks, Commissioner. I just wanted to follow up on that to say that, I feel like we've come a long way as a state in understanding that family peer support and youth peer support can really be effective, and that it's been in many systems, including mental health and addiction and developmental disabilities. It's now in the child welfare system and needs to be strengthened in the juvenile justice system. We know that when families are involved, when stakeholders are involved in general, that there are better outcomes. And it can be anything from making sure that the young person gets to the court date that they need to be at, to making sure that their probation isn't violated. Those are the kinds of things that families can help with if they're trained and able to be supported. And we really look forward to working with you. And we already are working on the Family Justice Initiative. One of the recommendations is to increase family and youth peer support, because there's nothing more effective than having a peer who you can trust and that has credibility to be able to help navigate a very challenging, unnavigable system. So we look forward to continuing to do that work with you.
Agreed.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Khadijah, for asking that question. We're going to kick it up to Aaliyah.
Hi, Commissioner. Can y'all see me even though the background is blurred? Y'all see me
I
fine?
see you. Mhm.
Okay. Hi, my name is Aaliyah. I'm 22 years old. I currently I'm from Harlem. I work at Youth Represent, which is a nonprofit organization that provides free legal services to young people under 26. And we also lead youth justice policy work around New York. And this was my first actual real job outside of fast food and retail, where I got to provide for myself and my family. And before the job, from 15 to 17, I spent a lot of time in and out the system. So having to go to court, having to stay in crossroads, having to attend programs. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to a public speaking program through Youth Represent, which is how I met them. And then I stayed connected with them and went up with them to Albany to fight for protecting raise the age and stuff like that. So later on, 2 years later, when I was 19, they opened up a job position and I was granted the opportunity to actually work on staff and be able to get more young people that have system involvement, involved in advocacy and youth justice work. And I was able to do that based off of my lived experience. And I was granted the opportunity to use my lived experience to do this work, where now I have a youth committee, which Carlos is part of, that speaks up on different issues that affect them. And none of that would have been possible without the investment into young people like myself. So my question is, right now with the New York Justice Innovation Fund, it was meant to invest in real alternatives, but with ongoing attacks to raise the age and increase rollbacks to youth justice reforms, what is DCJS doing to resist the push towards recriminalizing young people, especially Black, brown, and low-income youth? And can y'all commit to fully funding community-led solutions?
We're committed to all of that. And we're, we were heavily involved in the implementation, in many ways, of Raise the Age, and we believe in that. Raise the Age did one thing, which was, to keep young people of a certain age out of adult prisons. That's what it was supposed to do, and that's what it's doing. Aside from that, the money tied to making sure that the implementation went well, there's still a lot of money left on the table. And we have ideas, and we propose ideas on how to use that money to provide the things. I traveled all over the state with my staff in the last, I've done 3 tours. We've done something like 32 cities in the last 3 years. And in all communities, Utica, Binghamton, everywhere we go, Bronx, wherever. I mean, the city's a little different because you have more access. You can get on a train and get somewhere. In upstate, it's harder, but the needs are all the same. People just need a place to go after school, or in between school and home, or instead of home. And a lot of those programs that existed, like 20 years ago, don't exist anymore. We were in a city where in the morning the law enforcement folks were complaining, that the kids are disrespectful and they don't know how to behave, and then in the afternoon, the community folks said, well, we used to have these programs. And the mayor, who was complaining in the morning, had shut them down, so they didn't tie that, shutting down of these programs to, plus, it has to be said sometimes that we have to remember that our policies, right, we're responsible as citizens for the policies that wound up encouraging the mass incarceration of millions of young Black men, Black and brown. And so we're in a state of repair for that. We're still repairing, helping communities repair. We have kids who had no access to grandparents, uncles, fathers, and they're still in repair. And I believe I believe that it's our job in government and as people who care about youth to help do that repair. And that requires, funding. So at DCJS, we continue to explore all the mechanisms for making Raise the Age funding more accessible across communities. We understand some of that money got stuck at the county level. We're happy to help to unstick it and to use it for the things that the youth, A, are telling us they need, and B, the data and all the work that you guys have done is telling us. At DCJS, we invest heavily in community. In community-led solutions. We believe that, all the historic achievements we've made in crime stats have been the community working together with law enforcement. The community has to be at the table, and each community, has named some communities wanted to invest heavily in mental health services, and so we did that, and other communities wanted these after school or alternative, so if you're not in school and you're not home, you deserve a quiet space to go and be in community with other youth. And we want to fund those things, but we want to build on the local capacity to do that. We don't think it's something that the state should say, here's a state center for kids. No, it has to be, it has to be local. It has to be endorsed by the folks in the community, and it has to be, it has to derive its credibility from that relationship. Alicia, do you have your hand up?
Aaliyah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a follow-up question to what you said in terms of, I appreciate your answer, first of all, but speaking to what you said in terms of having those ideas as to where we could put the money and how we could fund it into communities outside of YJNO, how can young people be part of that conversation? And then also my second part to the question was just, can you confirm that DCJS won't be supporting any efforts that lead to more youth being locked up, being all of this is going on regarding rollbacks for Raise the Age and stuff like that?
I mean, that's a tough question to answer directly. I can tell you that DCJS in its practice and its policies, I mean, there are no DCJS policies, there's the governance policies. But in practice, we are about helping youth succeed. And the reason we have a whole category of alternatives to incarceration is because nobody is a fan of incarceration. First of all, we don't have enough space, it's so expensive. And taking anyone of any age far away from their community, for rehab has been proven, not to work, right? So we would like to fund on the front part, but my goal is to get on the prevention wagon as soon as possible. But so DCJS supports all the things that would keep you out of detention, as long as there's not a public safety issue, obviously, as long as someone's not a danger to their community or to themselves. And so, I mean, that's the short answer to your question. I think we will remain loyal to our core values, which are about freedom, about agency, and about success. There's a program in the city called Exalt Youth, which we think is a wonderful program for kids who want to kind of take the education route, and we're funding a pilot next year in Syracuse. So that's how committed we are to sometimes everything is not scale, right? Sometimes you have a good idea that can work in some communities and you do a pilot and then you take it to others. And that's what we're, that's what we're committed to do. I forgot the first part of your question, Aaliyah.
It was to your point that you made when you was like, y'all do have like a bunch of ideas of like what to do with that money and how to like use that funding. I was asking how can like young people outside of, I know you work with YJI, but how can young people that aren't in like YJI or other programs be involved in like implementing those ideas and stuff?
So we're working on some ideas, and I have to say that I am more enamored than I was before with the idea of trying to work through the youth bureaus, because we do have them in every county. And so we're looking to empower, we have to work on that together with OCFS. But there's an entity already of youth. And so if we could so rather than trying to fund all new things, it's trying to make money available through the systems that already exist, so that if you wanted to apply for a grant to do some work, you could. That's what we did with RISE, which is a feature. You can look it up on our website of DCJS. We came into the communities. We said, we're going to give you $2 million. You tell us what to do with it. And the communities went to work and said, these are our priorities. And anytime we can defer the decision about who to give the money to the community, that's the route we want to take. And so, that's our goal. That's to me the major goal.
Yeah. Aaliyah, do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, no problem.
So I want to lift up one, thank you, Commissioner, for all your answers so far, and really appreciate your commitment to.
Wait, what is everything else? Why am I the only one answering questions? Are we still waiting
Because
for
you're the star. I'm sorry. The legislators didn't make it. But you're the expert too. So I think a big part of what Aaliyah is asking, and this is coming from a place of deep admiration for what you all decided to do with Project Rise and your engagement of community. I mean, I've read the statute and the funding. That's not something that you had to do the way you did it. That was a conscious choice, and I think we all respect that and are even inspired by it. And I think I would add to like just a finer point on what Aaliyah is saying is that if the day comes when, whether it be raise the age dollars that get unstuck, if there's the creation of something at some point down the road, like the Youth Justice Innovation Fund, do you foresee the possibility of a very targeted outreach and engagement of youth themselves in the communities where we may, open up funding like that? If the opportunity came before your office to do something like that, where young people themselves are engaged about the things they want to see in their community, is that something that your agency would be on board with?
Right. If the money was the sole responsibility of DCJS, that's the route we would take, because it's worked and it's empowering. But if we have to share responsibility with other agencies, we still do the battle, on behalf of youth. I think I'm more and more convinced that and I have to say that DCJS has been a trailblazer there, and we've had 2 amazing conferences in the last year. Well, actually, one was put on by OYJ in June, and the other one was earlier in the spring by our Office of Youth Justice, where we just spent the day listening to youth, and it was amazing, and both experiences were amazing. I think that we as a team at DCJS understand that it's really important to listen to what people are telling you they need. And I think I wasn't that, I didn't think that way when I came to government, because I thought, I know what's good for my kids. But the world is changing and those situations are different. So I think more and more, adults should listen to young people, because they're living in a moment, right? And sometimes we don't want to hear them, or we don't want to understand them, because we're so used to doing things right in the same way. And so now that I'm in my 60s, I've reached the conclusion that I am not an expert on youth, But I am an expert, I think, on getting things done and in making sure that the money shouldn't just fund this year's projects, that we want to fund the ability for communities to be resilient, right? And to control their own resilience and to have a role in how that money is going to be used. And that community includes the young people. I hope does that make sense? I know that was a long answer.
Yeah, no,
I'm getting
I think
tired.
that's music to our ears and something we all need to be reminded of. And also, I know this isn't like a formal testimony and you didn't like swear in or anything, but I'm pretty sure it's perjury. No one believes you that you're in your 60s.
Oh, I am so in my 60s. But I'm going to tell you another thing because I just was talking about it earlier that as an example of this concept of listening to people, right? I'll tell you a quick story that I was watching, I don't know, television, and I've been seeing this commercial. There's a banking app called Chime, and there's this commercial where the young girl says, "I don't like banking fees," and then she says, "I'm with Chime because they give me the ability to overdraft like to $200." And the first time I saw it, I was like, but that's not the way you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to balance your checkbook, right? Because I was raised in the last century. And then I kept seeing these commercials, and then I came to understand and admire the company because they did their research, right? If they want young people to bank, young people are not going to brick and mortar, right? And so they want young people, they have to cater to their needs. And they're telling you, I don't want to get an overdraft fee. If you're my bank, you should have my back, right? Up to $200. And so I came back to my staff, and we had a retreat, and I was like, it's all about learning, right? Because people, in the commercial world, if people like blue boots, you don't start making red ones because they're good for them, right? You make more blue ones. And so I think that's the way we have to approach this market, right? Which is youth. Listen to them. And even though sometimes they're saying something that goes against kind of and I was like, why am I so rigid about banking? It'd be nice not to have an overdraft, right? I mean, I'm at the point in my life where I don't worry about that anymore, but there was a time. And so I had to admire these young people who said, no, you're going to help me build my credit and you're not going to give me an overdraft fee. And I think that kind of whole marketing approach to this young market is how we have to look at all the services we offer. What do people want? Where do they want it? How do they prefer it? And we should be open to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate the analogy. And that's very, I mean, I think we've heard that time and time again when you engage young people, like, well, we don't want it. What do you mean we have all this stuff for you? We figured it out. And here it is. And oh, they're not using it. Why aren't they using it? And time again, it's not what we asked for. No one asked for this. And adults in general, especially adults running systems, tend to guess at what they think youth want or need and think less about like what they express the desire in. And so when you co-develop and co-design things, that comes through and then there's buy-in. I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, and we agree. I want to lift up 2 points that were made by our Chuck Allen, who's the chair of our policy committee at Families Together. He has a longtime partner in government, local government. He said OCFS used to fund delinquency prevention and positive youth development programming via county youth bureaus. That money mostly dried up, leaving localities scrambling to fund such programming. Those decisions were made at the state level. How can this change? If money is only provided via probation systems, it'll not reach the youth at risk of entering the systems, only to those youth who already are involved.
I mean, I can't answer for OCFS. I think that's a question for OCFS. They're also going through changes, and they have a new commissioner who I know who ran the youth bureau in Westchester. So she's very familiar with those issues, and I suggest that you provide an opportunity for her to address that.
Fair enough. Okay. I think we are approaching the extent of our questions. I do see that Chuck also asked a question around probation departments funding peer support for youth and families. I know there's a fair amount of work that happens with the credible messenger side of things through DCJS and others. I think a previous question that was asked and answered had a thrust of, and Paige mentioned this too, like we need family peer support for those parents so that they can have someone in their corner, can help navigate the system. This is, maybe you're aware, are there any probation departments under your purview that do that? Or is that something you're interested in exploring further?
Right, I think a lot of them do that, and we know that because we go out in the field. I know that in Nassau and Suffolk, they're doing that. And again, it depends the size of the department. I mean, in the last, we're still recovering in many ways from the pandemic. And so in the last few years, we've been out there and a lot of issues have been kind of recovering, from the pandemic, and people, traditional, means of getting information change, to online, but the online thing also, creating sometimes a rift, that's hard to fill, especially in places in New York where transportation is. But I would say that we at DCJS, both in OYJ and in OPS, which is where all our law enforcement folks are, we remain supportive of youth support, of peer support at every level. Peer support in the law enforcement, peer support in youth services, and kind of that. For me, peer is that kind of community support I've been talking about, which is to involve people from the locale, to really draw on. So we were in Binghamton, and in Binghamton we have situations with a lot of youth who are the rural youth, who are sometimes disengaged. It's all around transportation, and so they can get to one place, and we work to kind of provide that community, that peer support, even if the distance is an issue. We try to do that, using this technology, because people are just looking to build community. You have questions from it's so hard for me to keep track of the chat, mostly because I'm blind too. So I'm trying to.
No, actually, what I just realized is one of the youth joined as an audience member. So that's why we didn't know they were here. I'm so sorry we didn't see that earlier, Shantia. So we do have one more question.
Okay.
Appreciate your patience. All right, I'm gonna allow you to talk. You are now promoted, Shantia, to being a panelist. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I do think that I clicked the wrong thing. But my name is Shantia Schofield. I'm 17 years old and originally from Catskill, New York. Since 2023, I resided in a residential treatment center in Albany as a result of being placed in foster care due to parental negligence. Since being placed in foster care and being put in a residential treatment facility, center, I've seen many young JD placements throughout all 3 units within my facility, and because of that, I've had a unique perspective of JD cases and the difficulties in receiving care and support that they need. Many young people leaving juvenile justice placements face stigma and are too often treated like criminals instead of being respected for their circumstances and potential, or having anyone try and understand the root of their issues to prevent future encounters with the juvenile justice system. So my question is, what steps can DCJS take to ensure that these youth receive the services, support, and target programming they need, as opposed to placing them in placements that more often than not don't address their individual case-by-case challenges? How can transitional placements be strengthened through bias training for staff and development of specialized supports for youth returning from secure settings to ensure a successful return home without recycling through the juvenile justice system?
Thank you. So, as you know, OCFS oversees youth placement facilities and reentry services for the juvenile delinquent population. Probation has no formal role in those services or statutory authority to engage youths and families during the placement and reentry process. That's not us, that's OCFS. In advance of placement, the family court will have ordered a predispositional investigation written by probation. That investigation report follows a youth into placement to not only provide historical information about the person, but it also identifies the primary drivers of the problem behaviors, right? To help develop a treatment plan. DCJS, however, does fund many alternatives to incarceration and detention programs, alternatives to incarceration and detention. Most serve individuals whose cases are or remain in criminal court. Some agencies that receive DCJS funding do have programming, such as mitigation services that also work in the family court system. But those type of programs prepare plans, which include a comprehensive report addressing the root, but they don't drive placement, right? Placement is the purview of OCFS. The plans that these folks put together provide actionable steps to assist in providing the alternatives to detention by facilitating referrals to programming and services, mental health services, whatever is necessary. If a detention cannot be avoided, those plans outline the services and interventions that can and should be provided while the individual is in placement. As I mentioned earlier, on August 20th, we released a request for applications that includes individuals in youth part as an eligible target population. As I said, I hope to get many creative applications. The Office of Children and Family Services, OCFS, provides funding to most services for youth 17 years and younger. Those are called supervision and treatment services for juvenile programs. I'll put that link in the chat also. I will point out that through Project RISE and the SNUG program, DCJS funds credible messenger programming across New York State. Those programs, philosophically, we believe that those with lived experience are experts in supporting young people in their communities. And these programs view previous system involvement not as a stigma, but as a strength, an asset to preventing violence and system involvement when they're connected to the appropriate training, resources, and people support, the right community. DCJS also develops and provides implicit bias training to all probation departments and ATI programs across the state. In partnership with the New York State Youth Justice Institute, which I mentioned earlier, DCJS developed and implemented the Policy Equity Academy, PEA, to assist youth service agencies through training, technical assistance, to address individual and systemic bias, to reduce barriers to accessing programming, and to implement equity-driven programming. And that initiative should be enhanced. And I'll put a link in the chat for the press release that announced that. So again, DCJS does not have a direct role, Shantia, but in every way that we are involved, we're also clear about our position, which is to keep the individual whole as possible, and to make sure that the professionals involved have received training and understand, kind of the ministry, if you will, how we feel that success is best ensured.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
Okay. I want to say thank you so much, Commissioner, for fielding a lot of tough questions, a lot of questions that I'd imagine sort of challenge and flip the script, and I just appreciate so much your time in consideration of all this and so much time with us. I appreciate the audience members for coming out, and above all, I appreciate the ambassadors, our youth and parents who spoke out and came to this room. It's not always easy to do any form of public speaking, but to do so about your lived experience and things that you went through is deeply vulnerable. We know that. We'll hold this room for you after if we want to talk, debrief. But I so deeply appreciate what you brought to this conversation today.
And as I said at the beginning, this was our fourth and final town hall, Family Empowerment Town Hall. And for those listening, this is just the beginning of our advocacy work for the 2026 legislative session, which begins in January. Because the governor's budget starts getting developed now, we want to be able to give the opportunity for state agencies to hear from young people and parents. And so this has been a great schedule to start with. And it also gets the juices flowing for us as advocates to know where we need to focus our energies for the next several months. and then into the legislative session in 2026. So thank you everyone for participating in these town halls. And please, anyone who missed any of them, they're on our YouTube channel and our website. And again, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, ambassadors, for telling your story, for proving that nothing about us without us is the way to go when it comes to any kind of policy making. If you include stakeholders, you'll have better outcomes. And these are your stakeholders right here on the screen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.